Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of New Breakpoint. My name's Simon Waite, and thank you very much for joining us this morning. As always, we're ready to take your questions and feedback during the session. If you'd like to join in, you can head on over to the YouTube page where this video is being broadcast. Maybe you're already there. Once you log in, you can post comments using the YouTube commenting section, or otherwise you can follow us on Twitter and post your questions via Twitter. Either of those two channels will come into the studio and we'll be able to answer your questions today. If you find the content for this and our other shows exciting or interesting, please feel free to join our once a month email newsletter by following the link on the screen there. All it needs is a name and an email address, and we'll send you a really interesting set of links and topics and events for Australian developers just once a month. And then finally, if you are joining in, asking questions or being a part of our broader community, please ensure you review our code of conduct, because we really want to make sure that everyone feels welcome and safe when they're contributing to our community. All right, today's show, we've got a cracker actually, and we've got a fantastic speaker and an interesting topic. Infrastructure as code is one of those really sweet spots that, when you move into a cloud environment, really changes the way you do things. And oftentimes it can feel a little bit daunting when you get a wall of JSON back through something like an ARM template or one of the other templating languages that you might use to do cross-cloud deployments. Microsoft recognized ARM can be a bit of a difficult item to manage, particularly if you have complex infrastructure environments. And to that point, we've decided to invest our time in building a simplified model over the top of ARM called Bicep. But I don't want to steal all the thunder of our guest speaker today. So Scott Holden is a member of our team in Melbourne. He's an advanced Azure specialist. He's a guy who really knows his stuff. And I don't want to hype him too much, but I think you're really going to enjoy this topic. So let me get Scott onto the feed and we'll have a quick chat, and then we'll get him started. Hey,
Perfect.
Scott,
Hey,
good
Simon,
morning.
how are you?
I'm doing well. Hopefully that wasn't too much hype to bear for a Thursday.
I mean, it's put it up there. I mean, I've got to live up now, and hopefully some of the demos we'll run through today will begin to show the power that you've been talking about when it comes to Bicep.
Look, I have done a lot of infrastructure as code over the years, and I know that that export to template, when you open that the first time in something like Visual Studio Code, it's like, my goodness, what am I going to do with all of this JSON? So I think Bicep, from what I see, looks like a step in the right direction for making it much more approachable, both for people who are new to this space and people who have maybe been doing infrastructure as code for some time. Look, I've taken up enough of your valuable time, so I'm going to hop off the stream and I'm going to bring up your screen and then over to you. And I really appreciate your time this morning, Scott. Looking forward to this. Speak to you soon.
Sounds great. I'm excited as well, and welcome everyone. Let's have a bit of a conversation about Azure Bicep, flexing on those deployments and really taking advantage of some of the awesome tooling that's coming out of Microsoft at the moment with regards to infrastructure as code. Now, we're going to be digging into Bicep quite a bit. We'll go into a ton of detail, especially around some of the templates and how to actually get started as well. But I find it's really good to kind of set the scene to begin with. Let's have a bit of a look at what ARM is to begin with before we talk about ARM templates or Bicep or anything like that. So when we begin to talk about Azure, and in particular the Azure Cloud, we need a way of actually controlling the resources we deploy. And this is done via the Azure Resource Manager, and you'll notice this is where ARM comes from. The Azure Resource Manager is the control plane that really drives a ton of different resource providers behind the scenes. And these are terms you've probably seen as you've been running through the Azure portal or working with the Azure CLI. The resource providers then dictate individual services to spin up, spin down, reconfigure. And that's things like Microsoft.Storage for storage accounts, Microsoft.Compute for VMware. For VMs, Microsoft.Network for virtual networks and public IPs, that sort of thing. So these resource providers give a way to control a number of different services via ARM, and this is actually all done via an API. Now, the neat thing about ARM being an API, to a degree, a single point of entry to all of these different resource providers, means no matter what tooling we're using, whether it be the Azure portal, the Azure CLI, whether it's PowerShell, whether it's something like Terraform, or even talking to this API directly, you can follow the same patterns and procedures. Now, this is neat because it means anything we can do inside the Azure portal, we can do via the Azure CLI or via a REST API. There is a little bit of an issue though, and it especially comes when we talk about larger scale deployments. Using the API directly is incredibly powerful, but if we need to provision 50 resources, all of a sudden you need to make 50 API calls, which becomes a little bit unwieldy, let alone the dependency or the order that they're deployed in. So rather than making these 50 individual calls, a concept of ARM templates was created. And an ARM template is a declarative way of kind of defining an environment. And this is what we're going to talk about today. The biggest thing though, and you'll notice the second you look at that icon, is that it's JSON. ARM templates are really designed to marry up to what the Azure Resource Manager expects. Behind the scenes, the ARM schema is very similar to just traditional create or update calls. So in that manner, ARM templates can be pretty complex, and we've seen walls and walls of JSON just to do some fairly simple things. Let's change this a little bit. Let's have a talk about Bicep. So Bicep is a domain-specific language with a couple of key goals in mind: cleaner syntax, type safety, and modularity as a first-class citizen rather than being an afterthought. Now, the power that Bicep actually brings is that it's an abstraction over ARM rather than a brand new language. This means that the second a resource provider supports a new feature or a new resource, it's available in Bicep. You don't have to wait for pull requests to be merged just to use Bicep to deploy a resource. On top of that, it really brings some amazing user tooling, and this is what, to a degree, drew me to Bicep at first, and I've never looked back. The fact we can do linting and validation inside the IDE, having type safety means we can do those checks before we kick off the ARM template to deploy it, but having the ability to do autocomplete, so much easier, and we'll have a look at some of those snippets today. Now, Bicep, because it is a domain-specific language and an abstraction over ARM, it works in a little bit of an interesting way. If we have a Bicep template, we actually have a couple of different options of how we get this onto the Azure platform. The first way we can look at using Bicep templates is actually building them into ARM templates. So behind the scenes, because it's just an abstraction, all of a sudden you can build out to an ARM template and deploy that template directly. Now, this is great because it means in your builds, you could actually generate ARM templates as artifacts from your Bicep templates. But I'm not a fan of doing multiple steps just to deploy into Azure, so there is a little bit of a simpler way. The Azure CLI and the Azure PowerShell modules actually contain the ability to deploy Bicep files directly. This means we can pass a Bicep file to the Azure CLI, have it automatically do that conversion for us, and pass it off to ARM to then deploy those resources on your behalf. So a really cool and easy way to actually deploy those resources without having to go through that build process first of all. Anyway, enough theory. Let's actually dig into it and have a look at what Bicep looks like and how we can get started with it. Now, my editor of choice is VS Code. Absolutely love it. And I recommend if you're getting started with Bicep, grab the Bicep extension. So I'll jump down here to the extensions tab and you can see there's the Bicep language support extension. This is amazing. It's to a degree the secret sauce of writing really quick and simple Bicep templates. Install this and you're up and running. To get started, we're going to create a Bicep file. So I've got a file here called simple.bicep that we're going to be writing into. Now, if we were writing an ARM template, the first thing we'd have to start with is a ton of JSON boilerplate, and that's a little bit complex to write out, let alone remember. Bicep takes a slightly different approach. Because it's a domain-specific language, it doesn't need to conform to JSON. This means we can start with an empty file and build from there. To kick things off, what I'm going to do is actually define a resource, and let's build out a storage account. So I'm going to type in the word resource, if I can spell it correctly. And this is how we begin to define a resource in a Bicep template. Resource a name or an alias, if you will. This is kind of a nickname we can give it throughout this deployment process. So I'm just going to call this storage, once again misspelling it, just to give it a nickname that we can refer back to. Now, the second I hit space after giving it a name, autocomplete pops up and says, hey, you're deploying a resource. Here's all the resource providers I know about. And to me, this is amazing. Rather than having to jump backwards and forwards between the documentation and the REST API spec and this ARM schema spec, having all of the resource types shown instantly means you don't have to look anywhere else but your IDE. So we can begin to type in, say for example, storage account, and it'll pop up and show everything related to storage accounts. So I'm just going to choose storage accounts here. The second step is it's then going to prompt you for what API version you'd like to use. Now, if we think back to ARM templates, finding these versions, selecting the correct version was way too complex. In Bicep, because you select your resource type first and then your API version second, it's really easy to just press enter, bang, you're up and running with the latest API spec for a given resource type and resource provider. That's it. That's the first line we need to write to actually begin building out a resource. The second step we need to do is then actually define what the resource contains. So I'm just going to put in an equal sign, and once again the autocomplete's going to pop up and it's going to give me a couple of different options. These are snippets inside of the Bicep extension that allows us to, rather than writing everything by hand, get it to pre-fill some things for us. Now, the one that I want to use is actually pre-highlighted because I basically use this 24/7. The required properties snippet will actually pull all of the required properties from the resource that we want to deploy and pre-populate them for you. So if I just press enter, bang, I've got all of my required properties laid out, ready for me to tab through and fill in. So let's give this a name. Let's give it store, and then we'll put a random number at the end so we're sure it's a unique storage account. Location, I will actually want to use the resource groups location. And if you've worked with an ARM template before, this is where you have to start doing magic with strings. We go square brackets and then start writing a ton of functions, and it can be a little bit complex. Once again, because Bicep is really focused around making it as simple as possible to use, we can actually just start typing any of the functions that are available inside an ARM template without having to wrap it in a string. So here I can type res and have resource group pop up, press enter, and it gives me information about what the resource group function does. Right here will save you a couple of hours easily on every single ARM template. We can then go across because we want the resource group we're currently in. I can do dot, and it brings up all the properties on the resource group object. Once again, rather than having to go backwards and forwards between the ARM documentation and your editor, having it all in one place makes it so simple to get started. So I'm going to call this location. And let's go down to our SKU name. Now, SKU name always gets me. I'm like, what do I put here? Is it free text? Is it something that I need to conform to a particular standard? Because Bicep is based off the ARM schema, any details that are baked into the schema itself will actually be presented into the IDE. So right here, I can actually go control space, and it will begin to suggest values for me. In this case, because SKU name is actually an enum, it's given me a couple of different options. So I can scroll down here and turn LRS. Likewise, for kind, I can do the same thing. Control space, choose what type of storage account I want. Right there, we've got a storage account in 8 lines without me having to move to any other windows and having all the information right there ready to go. And this is the power of Bicep for me, is the ability to get started really, really quick. Now, this is great if we're building out just a resource, but what if we need to pass values in and out? Well, on top of this resource, we can actually go ahead, and I probably shouldn't minimize it. Let's go ahead and put in a parameter. So I'm going to type in param. I'm going to give this a name. Let's call it prefix, for example. I'm going to say that this is a string, and I could either leave it blank like that, so the user could provide a value, or I can actually give it a default value, and here I might type in store, for example. Comparing this to the number of lines and number of squiggly brackets you need to do in an ARM template just to add a parameter really shows you how quick you can build out these objects. But more importantly, it's actually gone a step further, and I've now got a squiggly line under prefix. It's picked up that this parameter has been defined, but never used. So this is a great way to then go back and actually clean up after the fact. Now, my name here, I actually want to use the prefix in. So those that are used to ARM templates know to a degree the plight of concat. The fact that the second we want to begin joining things together, we have to go in and, all right, let's do a concat, and then I want to put in the prefix, and then I want to put in a couple of random numbers at the end. And that totally works. The same way you'd write in an ARM template. But once again, the IDE, so Visual Studio and the Bicep extension, has said there might be a better way of doing this. So if I come over to here, go Control Dot to see quick actions that I can take, it's actually suggesting that rather than using concat and the concat function, I use string interpolation. So let's press enter and use that. Straight away, this is so much easier to read. String interpolation really means that I can read it as a string rather than having to parse in my mind what concat is, what commas are removed, what stay there. String interpolation is one of those really nice features that comes out of the box with Bicep and is what makes it so powerful. On top of this, we can also do outputs. So let's put in an output. And I'm going to call this storage name because I don't know what my storage account name is at this stage. It's only computed when the template's deployed. And onto my storage name, I'm going to say that this is a string. But I need to think here, how do I actually reference that storage account that I provisioned? In an ARM template, traditionally you might create a variable and then use the variable in a few places. But I don't want to pollute this template with a ton of extra detail that I don't actually need. So rather than building up variables, I can actually just type in storage, the nickname that I gave to this resource at the top, and I can do storage dot and have access to all the properties that exist on the storage account. Now this is neat because it means you don't once again have to go digging through the documentation just to then jump back into the IDE to figure, hey, what did I actually want to call? So here I can go storage.name, and that's now going to output the name of the storage account when I deploy this template. Super cool. Now, what we've seen so far here is very much Bicep. Let's actually build this into an ARM template, so that bottom path that we talked about before. I've got here a little terminal, and we can install the Bicep CLI standalone, but I actually prefer to use the Bicep CLI inside of the Azure CLI. So if we do AZ Bicep, we actually get the full power of the Azure Bicep CLI inside the Azure CLI. If you're not sure if this is installed or if it's running the latest version, you can always do AZ Bicep version to bring up A, is it installed, and B, what version is it currently running. Here I'm running the latest version, so we're all good to go. So I can go ahead and do an AZ Bicep build and pass in a file using -f. And in this case, I'm going to pass in simple.bicep, which is the file that we've created. We'll press enter and it's going to go ahead and parse the Bicep template, make sure that it's complete, that it doesn't have any errors, and then it's going to output a JSON template. And we can actually jump across here to simple.json and boom, we have our ARM template that was that the Bicep template represented. And if you scroll through here, I mean, this is 36 lines. That's a little bit, that's a little bit complex. I wouldn't want to write this by hand. But if we compare this to our Bicep template that's 12 lines, incredibly compact and easy to understand, and I mean only 4 squiggly brackets, which is pretty good, this is really powerful. Now, we'll do some deployment in a moment, but I actually want to dig a little bit deeper into one of the features of Bicep that really, to a degree, makes my life a ton easier. Within Bicep, we have a concept of modules. So we can actually create additional files that contain functionality, that contain additional resources that we can include across. So one of the things I love to do with a storage account is put an alert based on its capacity. And in fact, I've got a module over here that I've created that does exactly that. But let's say this is the first time I've opened this module. What does this do? How does it relate to each other? What resources are in here? There's actually the ability to use the visualizer button in the top right-hand corner to bring up a visualization of this Bicep template. And it actually runs through and shows us the different resources that exist inside of it, which is really, really neat. So when I'm working with a Bicep template that I haven't seen before, the first thing I'll do is click the visualizer to see what's inside of it. Now that we've actually got this Bicep module, let's use it in our original module. So we'll jump back over to here, and rather than defining a resource, I'm going to define a module. When we press space, we give it a name, so I'm just going to call this alert. We'll press space again, and it'll bring up a local directory listing. Because it's just looking at another file, we can select alert.bicep, which exists here, and once again put in an equal sign to begin defining our module. Now, I could write this out by hand, but I'm lazy and prefer to be that way. So let's use required properties again to actually pre-fill all the information about this module. We press enter, it's set up the name, and it's pulled in all the parameters for us. So I might call this store alert, our alert capacity in megabytes. So I'm going to say if we go above 50 meg, and then we need our storage account name. So once again, we can just go storage.name. Done. We're up and running. We've got a new module that we've just added in that contains our alerting, and we haven't really polluted this original storage account file. It's very, very lightweight. Now, if you've worked with ARM templates, right now you're probably screaming, oh no, multiple files. Where's the storage account? How do we deal with linked templates? What does that look like? The nice thing in Bicep is it actually compiles it down into a single ARM template for you. So if we run this same AZ Bicep build command and build out that JSON file, you'll actually notice that once it's complete, we only have one JSON file, which is simple.json. And this contains not only, I didn't save my file, that probably helped. Let's jump back here and do a build again. This one file contains not only the storage account, but all of the alerting components as well. So I'll open this back up. And here we've got the storage account, we've got a sub deployment that contains our action groups and our metric alerts. All of a sudden, we've got like 133 lines of JSON written for us and built down by the Bicep CLI. So super, super cool. The last thing that we'll do is let's actually deploy this and see what happens when we go and run a Bicep deployment. So here I'm going to do an AZ Bicep, I'm going to do an AZ deployment group create. I'm going to pass in a resource group and I'm going to pass in a file. And here I'm going to pass in simple.bicep. Now I'm actually going to go a step further and do -c. So rather than just running this, I actually want it to give me confirmation of what will be deployed. Let's press enter and let it run. The first thing that it's going to do behind the scenes is build that Bicep template down into a JSON template, pass it across to that ARM API and kick off that deployment. But because I've specified /c, it's not actually going to deploy those resources straight up. It's going to actually prompt me to say, this is what's going to happen if this template was deployed. So right here, we can see that there are 3 resources that would be created. I can run through and see all the information about the resources, which is really neat. So I'm going to hit no there and move on. The last thing I want to show, and this is to a degree, the ability to move across to Bicep without a massive investment, is the ability to decompile ARM into Bicep. So here I've got a super complex ARM template. I mean, it deploys a web app, a SQL server, a Redis cache, links them all together. I mean, it's 270 lines. If I want to now convert this across into Bicep, I can actually use the same commands we've been using so far, just with a couple of different arguments. So I'm going to jump into my convert folder. I'm going to do an AZ Bicep decompile and pass in my web app ARM template. Let's press enter and see what happens. Something to note about decompilation and going ARM to Bicep is it is best effort at the moment. It will try its hardest, and you'll normally end up getting a few warnings like this as it goes and decompiles. The nice thing though is this looks like it's just a couple of warnings, so it succeeded. So we can open up the Bicep file and have a little bit of a look through. And it's built us a pretty nice Bicep file that's only, 189 down from nearly 300 lines, so really compacted it down. My favorite thing though is the fact that when you do this process, it'll actually begin looking for any warnings or errors. So I can jump back into here and have a look and, what is this error? I've got an error here for max size bytes. Let's hover over the top. Here, the max size bytes was expecting an integer, but I passed in a string. It's given me a warning because it knows ARM is capable of dealing with that, but it knows it's not right, and int should be passed in an int. So this is the power of Bicep, giving you the ability to not only build out templates ridiculously quickly with fantastic IDE support, but also the ability to check for warnings, validate, before you even pass it across to the ARM template deployment engine. Now, Bicep is a really cool piece of technology, and I highly encourage everyone to give it a go. Type in AZ Bicep, get started. If you've worked with ARM templates, you'll feel right at home. But the best thing is, it's a little bit simpler than ARM templates, so you're not giving those squiggly brackets a massive workout, nor having nightmares of JSON.
Where was this years ago in my career? That's all I've got to say about Bicep. It's just like I must admit, I haven't worked very much with it since it was announced, and it's like just seeing this demo today, like the productivity, particularly with the IDE support inside of Visual Studio Code. I can reflect on hours spent alt tabbing between documentation, APIs, and ARM templates, and that magic code, magic string, magic placeholder type stuff inside of ARM templates is like, it's good to see that Bicep is really trying to address that. That was awesome, Scott. Thank you very much for that demo.
No problem.
Look, we've got show notes that have got links if you want to know more about Bicep. It's really well documented. Brendan Burns, who's one of our distinguished engineers, is really passionate in this space. So I know he's heavily involved in it. If you have, as excuse me, as Scott, excuse me, too much coffee this morning. If as Scott said, if you've got a large investment in ARM templates, it hasn't been wasted. Clearly, there's a work in progress at the moment with the Bicep tooling to help you back convert into Bicep. But I think the direction from me seems to be the long-term Bicep would be the right place to go to help boost that productivity when authoring templates. That's what it seems to be, based on what you said, Scott. Would that be accurate, you think?
Definitely. And I mean, Bicep to me, I wrote a template the other day and I needed to spin up a virtual machine with a Valheim server on it. And I wanted to have it all encompassing, so it was a single click and go.
Yep.
I wrote the entire thing in VS Code without even having to alt tab to view a reference. I've never had that happen before with an ARM template. The ability to have everything there is just best developer experience ever.
Yeah, I think just because of the multitude of resource types, even you very quickly can get yourself into having to look in multiple documentation locations to try and find out what's supported and what API versions. Even just having the API version available to you to choose from. I know that's probably a bit of a dark secret still if you're not familiar with it, but the fact that you get the required, the ability to pre-populate required properties, I think saves a lot of time, because I've certainly tried to submit ARM templates with required properties missing or with the invalid argument set. Look, thanks a lot, Scott, for your time today. It was awesome. We always try and get everyone to give a quick wave to everybody out there. So quick wave to everybody before we wrap up. Thanks a lot, Scott. You can reach out to Scott either through Twitter. I know his email address was in that video feed if those of you who are eagle-eyed spotted it.
Go for it.
He's a very busy man, so it's probably not the best way to get in contact with him. But look, you'll see Scott around the places when he's presenting, particularly in the Melbourne community. So thanks a lot for your time today, Scott, and we'll speak again soon.
Awesome. Have a great day, everyone. Cheers.
Bye. All right. So let's wrap things up. What a great demo that was. That sort of 15 minutes really shows you the productivity that you can get with Bicep, even if you're deeply familiar with ARM templates as they are today. Our next show for New Breakpoint will be next Thursday. Great episode coming up. We're going to talk to a couple of the doctors involved in Drumbeat AI and one of our Azure specialists who's been helping build out the Azure AI services that are helping support that project. That'll be next Thursday. As always, as I said just then, talking with Scott, our show notes contain any useful links if you'd like to learn more after today's episode about building with Bicep and doing infrastructure as code with Bicep. Thanks a lot, everyone, for your time today, and we will see you next week. Take care.